Welcome to the AlphaWarrior Show. We're excited to share diverse perspectives and expert insights with you. Please note that the views and information expressed by our guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the AlphaWarrior Show, its management, or our partners. Each of our affiliates and sponsors and partnerships is a separate entity, and their opinions are their own. Today's content is provided for information and educational purposes and should not be taken as specific advice, whether it be financial, medical, or legal. While we strive to present accurate and useful information, we cannot guarantee its completeness or relevance to your specific situation. We provide all information as is and encourage you to consult with a professional advisor to address your specific individual needs. Your use of any information from this broadcast is entirely at your own risk. By listening further, you agree to identify and protect the AlphaWarrior Show and its associates from any claims or damages arising from your use of this broadcast content. Changes to this disclaimer may be made at any time and will be done effectively immediately upon posting or broadcasting. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you find the episode both informative and thought-provoking. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to the next generation of warfare, psychological warfare. In modern conflict, the mind is a potent weapon. Discover General Michael T. Flynn's groundbreaking guide, The Citizen's Guide to Fifth Generation Warfare. Unlock tactics, strategies, and the mindset to navigate this cognitive battlefield that we all find ourselves in. Equip yourself against manipulation and emerge unscathed. Unleash your potential. Order now.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the AlphaWarrior Show. I am your host, Alpha. Stand by to stand by. It just seems so remarkable that we've had so many great guests on this show. And recently, it's almost like all these stories and all these information that's being provided is intertwined. And I think the reason we're seeing those connections is because as you start to expose corruption and kind of pull the curtain to see who's the man standing behind there, you realize that all these evil entities and all this stuff that's happening to us really all comes back to a select few, or what a lot of people would say the tip of the pyramid, or the 1%. And I can tell you that today's show and the gentleman we're going to be speaking with is going to bring us that much closer to figuring out what the heck is going on in this country. Take your notes and just be ready to be challenged. Cognitive dissonance. A lot of people think, oh, I'm over it. You may recognize it. We'll see how close you are to being over it. But before we do that, let's get to two quick sponsors, because Alpha's got to keep food in the fridge, you guys. And first on deck, AlphaLikesGold.com. My partners over at Goldco. Be prepared. It's easy. It's fast. Rich are buying gold. Shoot, countries are buying gold, and preparedness is what I will scream about right now. I want to be very clear to everyone that's listening. I know I'm talking about a lot of scary things. We've been talking about a lot of scary things that could potentially affect all of us directly. Because one way or another, whatever happens to this country is going to affect me. It's going to affect you. It's going to affect someone that we know. So, what you do with that, it's up to you. It's your business. But if you are the cautious kind of person, which if you're watching this podcast, you probably are, and you want to be prepared just in case, then here's an idea. It might make sense to diversify your money with precious metals. It's why I've partnered with Goldco, because I believe this could be one of the best ways to help. So when you go to alphalikesgold.com, links down in the description, you will get your free gold and silver kit from Goldco, which shows you how to get into precious metals tax-free, penalty-free. Let me say that again. Tax-free, penalty-free. Even if your money is still in a retirement account like an IRA or a 401k, and you may already qualify to get up to $10,000 in free silver. The writing's on the wall, you guys. So do me a solid. Go to alphalikesgold.com to get your free gold and silver kit, because this is about taking back of control of your privacy and our freedom. I can't predict the future. Nobody can, but we can definitely prepare for it, and you should prepare for it. So again, you guys, go to alphalikesgold.com to get your free 2024 gold and silver kit right now. If you're driving, you don't got to pull over. Like everything I do, links are down in the description. You just got to click it and send. And then our last commercial, and then we're commercial free till the end of this production. America's favorite mustache. Sounds like a good deal, and we will be back in 60 seconds.
When I started MyPillow, it was just a problem solution, one product company. Well, since then, with the help of my dedicated employees, we now have hundreds of products, some you might not even know about. To get the word out, we're having a $25 extravaganza. 2-pack multi-use MyPillows, $25. MyPillow sandals, $25. And for the first time ever, our 6-pack towel sets, you guessed it, just $25. Our brand new 4-pack dish towels, $25. And I've never done this before. Premium MyPillows with all new Giza fabric, any size, any loft level, even king size for only $25. And there's so much more. So go to mypillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code for our $25 extravaganza. Order $75 and over. Your entire order ships absolutely free.
Absolutely free. Deep State, I suggest that you go and get some Lindell towels, because after this show and the gentleman that I'm bringing up get some information, y'all gonna be sweating. So go buy some towels for that sweat. Let me bring the man you guys want to hear from tonight. Jonathan, probably one of the most deplatformed and censored accounts on social media. How you doing, brother? How you holding up?
Man, I'm hanging in there. How you doing, Alpha?
I'm good, man. I like the pre-show conversations, that I get to have with my guests. It just, I love knowing that when I have, people like yourself on, that we understand the importance of the mission at play, especially when it comes to information, and I know I sound like a broken record on some of these spaces, but I tell people all the time, if you look at, the General and Boone's book on 5th generation warfare and how we started it from primitive warfare all the way up to nuclear warfare. And then we look at, 5th generation warfare is information. I mean, essentially, if that's the escalation of warfare, then what you're telling me is information warfare is more dangerous or more impactful than a damn nuke. And when I see it that way, I realize, then that shit's important. And, in this way, it's like, dude, it's like, I know we all say it's like a movie. It's real life, right? There's no respawning in this movie / video game. And that's why, when I hear people like you, that it makes me respect you so much more, because the information that the audience is going to hear from you right now is not something you get just by reading the headline in an article. It requires so much time and investment. And I know what that looks like, since that's what I did for a career. that it shows me your level of commitment to try to save this country and ultimately protect the damn world. And I hope people can grasp that, because this will turn into a 90-minute 2-hour segment, but it doesn't represent the literally hundreds if not thousands of hours that go into you being able to formulate this information and present it to where Marines that eat crayons like me can be like, oh, I get it. I know what he's saying. So with that, Jonathan, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, and then where do you want to kick this off, man? Where do you want to start?
Man, that was a hell of an intro. I don't know if I can live up to all that, but and as far as like the movie thing, they would never make this a movie. Nobody would believe it. It'd be too ludicrous. You'd show up with the screenplay in Hollywood, and they'd be like, "Get out of here!" Like this would never happen. But everything's been like that, and it's truth is definitely stranger than fiction. But everything you said, it really kind of hammers on the fact that, like, yeah, I've been deplatformed, as have many others. The ones that are really trying to get to the truth and really care about saving the country, we're always going to be swimming upstream, and we were always going to be fighting against, our corporatist adversaries, because they are the ones that are behind everything that's going on right now. And so, how I got into this, I began paying attention back in probably March of 2020, right when they pulled the whole, 15 days to slow the spread. And then all of a sudden, COVID doesn't spread at a, Black Lives Matter or George Floyd protest. But if you go to a college football game on Saturday, then you're killing grandma. How dare you? And that's my background is biomedical sciences and pharmaceutical sciences. So my first thought was, okay, yeah, that's BS. I mean, that's anti-scientific, 101. And that's when I started paying attention and realized that there was a much larger agenda at play. And so as I studied more and more, I realized that, okay, my career's in finance. I grew up right outside of Huntsville, which is basically the defense contractor capital of the Southeast. And I had a lot of, clients that were either logistics or DOD. And if you know anything about the government, they're going to overspend, but they're also going to game out every possible strategy and every solution. They're going to try to account for every possible scenario. And so my focus was thinking about it from their perspective. If there was a way that they couldn't extort you, they couldn't, hold anything over your head, you had an innocuous background, you didn't have any obligations, which I certainly want, family, spouse, kids, and that whole deal one day, but I'm not in that position right now. And so it kind of became kind of an obligation, if you will, to fight for so many people that want to be doing exactly what I'm doing, putting in as much time and being as contemptuous towards the enemies as they'd like to be, but can't because of those obligations. And so my thought was, what if somebody actually committed so much that they didn't have a way that they had actually gamed out somebody that was kind of like an X factor. And if you go on my old Twitter profile, if you can resurrect it from the dead, that I have a quote on there that says, become the variable they didn't account for. And it spoke to me saying, okay, we know that they're going to game this out. We know that they've already gamed out how they think the American people are going to try to fight back, and what level of depth they're going to be able to get to, and what disadvantages they're going to have, and how wide the information gap is for the American people that are, just taking in corporate media propaganda every day versus what reality actually is. And so my thought was, what if somebody could actually beat them and go beyond all of that? And, what if, and when I decided that I was going to get into this, my agreement that I made to myself was really two things. It was, number one, the truth, regardless of where it leads. So even if it leads back to the people that I've, held in high regard for a long time, that needs to take a back seat to America and the furtherance of the republic. And then the second thing was be so well prepared that if you had to fight the war yourself, like by yourself against everybody else, that you could still win. And I think that I know that's not the case, but taking ownership of it, Jocko Willem, I love his book where he talks about extreme ownership of, situation. A good leader always takes less credit than they deserve and takes more blame than they deserve. And so that was kind of my approach is, nobody is making me prepare or not prepare. So if I show up unprepared or ill-prepared to meet this disinformation operative in this situation and not be able to broadcast information to the public to wake people up, then I'm doing a disservice to myself and to my country. And you're a Marine. So, I mean, thank you for your service. And I never served. I saw this as my opportunity to serve my country.
A couple things there, and I like this conversation, and we'll get into the good meat potatoes intel here. But this is a good conversation because you reminded me of two things. A quote that I like, which is I was using this quote way back to my detective days, like before any of the revelations or the so-called red pill. But it was, and I want to say it's Heraclitus or Heraclitus, one of them dudes that said it. But the quote is, if you do not expect the unexpected, you will not recognize it when it happens. And it feeds right into what you're saying is that preparedness. And, we always use the word, information war. And I know I'm a broken record that I always tell people we use it and we say it, but have you really sat down and thought about what does that look like in your personal life right now? Like, when you say we're in an information war or you hear we're in an information war, like, what does that mean to you? And I think if people try to really make this personal, like you said, that ownership of this, I think people start to recognize it, and then you kind of know what direction you got to move in, because I really do look at this like a war. So if I go into a space, which for those that don't know, X, formerly Twitter, has like these virtual town halls where people go in, and it's an audio platform that I think now is beta testing some video formats to it, but it's a digital town hall, and I'll hear information, and I know the information they're saying is not correct, but I'm not dialed in that particular field enough, or I haven't researched it thoroughly enough to combat it, where I'm going to bring legitimacy to countering that. And when that happens, I'm so pissed with myself, bro. I'm pissed because I'm like, I know that this is either misinformation or disinformation, depending on the person providing it. And I can't protect the ears that are in here because I didn't prepare myself for that. And I should have. And so, of course, what do? I get into the books. I get into the digital media realm of research. I start and I make sure that the next time that shit gets brought up again, I'm positioned to combat it. And this feeds into why I just even respect you more now, man, is to understand your mindset. And I want the audience to understand your mindset so they know, why what you're about to hear, from Jonathan, and what we're going to kind of walk through is so important. And I'll preface it with, we would need weeks to cover the information that we're going to dive into tonight. So down in the bar you see scrolling across the bottom of the screen and down in the description is the information to follow Jonathan's account, which is probably going to get suspended or censored. But we will keep tabs on how you can keep following, on how you can keep tabs on his information. But you definitely want to get into those virtual town halls and hear this gentleman right here next to me speaking, because it will prepare you so that you don't find yourself in situations like I was, where you can't protect people's ears from propaganda that's meant to hurt people or enslave people. Because ultimately the whole point of this information warfare is for control. Like, they want to control you and enslave you. And if they can't do those two things, then they want to kill you. Like, that's where we're at. They can't control you and they can't enslave you. They are going to try to figure out how they kill you. And so with that, Jonathan, where do you want to kick this off, brother?
Well, yeah, you're so correct about the importance of information. It's always the first casualty of war is the truth. And I can't remember who it was. It was a former CIA director who said our job will be finished when literally everything that the American public believes is a lie. And when you mentioned being in a space and knowing that somebody's full of shit, and you know they are, but you can't articulate it. You're not as read in on the subject matter as you'd like to be able to put them on the spot and discredit them in those space environments. And those space environments can be so incredibly powerful, because let's say because the spaces that you host typically have between 500 and 1,000 people in it. So there's a good chance there's a lot of people in that space who've never heard anything. They like what you're going to be talking about. They probably got a referral from a friend or said, hey, you got to check out this alpha guy. He's like really clued in on what's going on. And so I think of it like, okay, this is an opportunity to change hearts and minds. And so it's my obligation to be prepared for those moments, and don't get too vested in spending all day, every day in spaces, because it can, start to work against you. You can become lax in your study, but know the spaces that you want to be in, know the lane that you want to be in, and what's most pertinent, and be the very best at it. And, as far as like memory and remembering things, and having an innocuous background, I feel, again, that's part of my obligation. Like, what draws me into doing this is because, back in May of 2022, I got my first and only DUI, and it was my only run-in with the law I've ever had, and I hope it's the only one I'll ever have. And it wasn't even a cool DUI story. I fell asleep in the Taco Bell parking lot, but you can't sleep in your car in Alabama and then admit you've had a couple of drinks to the cops when they tap on your window to wake you up. So I decided at that moment it was going to be one of those things where it was going to be a situation that either continued to spiral and became a whole lot worse and more of a factor in my life than it needed to be. Because even though I've never had a problem with drugs or marijuana or and I don't consider myself to have been an alcoholic, I could see that there were issues like with alcoholism. And so I saw it as a way to have an excuse to just get sober, because in Alabama, once you go into their what they call pretrial intervention program, they put you on a color code. So they call colors every morning, Monday through Friday. And so your color could be called any day of the week, sometimes multiple times a week. And if they call your color, they're going to test you for marijuana and alcohol from the night before. And if you fail, then you have to start the program over again, and you get one mulligan, and then you're talking about a year in prison. And so I was like, nah, I'm not going to do that. Let me just get sober. And I got past the first 3 days, didn't miss it. And I noticed that my brain it started changing. It's one of the biggest marketing pieces I've ever seen for sobriety, is that I was always good with numbers, always great at pattern recognition, and that stuff came naturally to me, but it's become a completely different level. It's cheat code now. I now feel like I have pretty much photo recall. I can see words on pages and remember names that I hadn't looked at in a year and a half. And it's enabled me to be able to take all the information, the volumes and volumes of information that we're up against in so many different disciplines all at once, and be able to process it and literally see it mapped out in my head almost in real time. And I can't explain it. It's nothing that I did to deserve it, other than saying that, you know, it was a gift that God said, you know, I'm glad you got sober. So I'm going to give you this, and I want you to use it for good. And I'm not going to tell you what that thing is, but you'll know it when you see it. And about September, it just like clicked, and I was like, this is what he's telling me to do. Like, I was given this to be this person in this place to do this job at exactly this moment. And that's that's helped not only like keep me motivated, but also keep me um, invigorated and focused on improving every day and continuing to get to the bottom of the rabbit hole. And I truly think, like, with the information, I mean, you've seen it with the information that we've put out in the last 5 days. I truly think I'm scraping the bottom of the entire rabbit hole, because it's now come all the way back around to the same people that I started digging into, and I've only been doing this since November of 2022. So there's been a lot of people that have been in the game longer than I have, and I never wanted to be in this game until it ended up on my doorstep. But I have a lot of respect for the people that have been in the fight a whole hell of a lot longer. But while I'm in this fight, my focus is like whatever it takes. Like, we have to recapture the Overton window. We have to win the informational war, so that we can also win the psychological war, so that we can also win the overall war. Because we are at war, like you said. You're absolutely right, and I hope all your viewers fully understand that we are at. It's not a hot war, guns blazing, but it's a fifth generation war, the exact way that we always believed it would be fought. And everything's digital now, so you don't always know that somebody's pissing on you and telling you it's raining. It's happening beneath the surface.
Did you see that video they put out on InfoWars? It's like a 20-minute little animated video about what it looks like. Oh man, it's too long for me to show on here. It's like 26 minutes or something like that, but it shows what life is like if we lose.
Oh yeah.
And I'm telling you, it's a little animated one, but it just the first 5 minutes makes your stomach turn like, we better get our shit together fast, because it's not, I know everybody's like, Alex Jones. This video is not hyperbolic. Like, just in the first 5 minutes, the things you see are the things they told you they want to do. Just, when you see what it looks like when it's presented to you in a, video fashion, you're just like, man, that's terrible. And the worst part is, me and you, we've had a pretty good run at life so far. We got some stories to tell, but what about the little ones coming behind us? Like that's, right? When we're long gone, like, do we want to be the men and women that when the future reads history books, honest history books, they're going to be like, man, those cowards failed us? Or do we want to look back and be like, man, they fought and shit, the deck was stacked against these people globally, and just enough of them had the courage to say, all right, you want to fight, let's fight. Let's see how this turns out. And I'll tell you, man, you've brought some names and entities to light that this is the tip of the spear. Like, these are the people that everybody's afraid to talk about. I'm telling you guys right now, the information you're going to hear from Jonathan right now, very few, if none, are you going to hear anywhere else, because people are either afraid to address it because they're that powerful, or they've been bought. So just understand the time that we have with Jonathan right now is so valuable, because not very many people are going to be willing to give him a platform to share this information. And I'm hoping that other people will see this and be like, you know what? Yeah, I love this country. I love my kids, and I love this world. And you know what? Hey, Alpha, connect me with Jonathan. because I have a 500,000 people that watch, or I have 1,000,000 people that watch. I really hope that this video tickles the courage gonads of some podcasters out there that I know watch this. I know they watch my show, and I hope you have the balls to be like, connect me with this guy so I can bring that to my audience. I really do hope you guys have the nuts to do that. So where do we start, Jonathan? Who we calling on deck, man? And just so you know, I have those the threads you sent me are bookmarked, so I can bring them up. And then, like I said, I have some videos that I'll bring up when it applies and we get there.
Cool. Yeah, and by the way, your check for saying all that nice shit about me is in the mail, buddy. I appreciate it. I don't think my mom talks this nicely about me. No. Everything you said is correct, and I don't know how people that are sitting quietly for whatever reason, whether it's fear or, they got their, they're getting their steady paycheck and whatever, but you think it always goes back to, what are we going to leave to our kids and grandkids? Like, I want to be having a family right now. I don't want to be doing this, but I also know that if we don't win right now, it's over forever, and we'll have nothing to leave them except slavery and servitude and subjugation to the worst people in the world, who genuinely do believe it's okay to harm and sexually abuse children. Let's just be clear about that. So, as far as where we start, I'd say the easiest way to grasp, like if we were going to do an hour of everything so that people can kind of bring it all together, I would say start from the 30,000 foot view. All right. And everything that I'm going to say has been put online. It's already been sourced, got the receipts, and you've probably not heard it. Like, I hadn't heard most of the things I talk about until I went and researched them myself and with other people that I trust that are absolute savages as well. So I would say everything that's happening today comes down to the American intelligence relationship with Israel and UK and Russia and, to a lesser extent, the Chinese Communist Party. But from a 30,000 foot view, there are a few key moments in history that have affected, American policy and global policies, and have led us exactly to this moment. And those few, historical events basically boil down to, at least, within most of our lifetimes, the assassination of John F. Kennedy and Robert F. Kennedy. So the avoidance of Israel's, what was formerly called the American Zionist Council, who was ordered to register with FARA, backed by John F. Kennedy, and his brother Robert, who was the Attorney General at the time, was pursuing that. And he was coordinating directly with Donald Rumsfeld, who was giving a little pushback. And what we know as AIPAC today was the American Zionist Council. Let me just make that clear. So you've got the two Kennedy assassinations that were tied to the American relationship with the CIA and Israel. And then fast forward, you've got the 9/11 attacks. September 11th, a lot of things changed. We were all stunned. We immediately went to war in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Iran, and we put in place new legislation to basically take down the Chinese walls between the FBI, the NSA, and the CIA, so that they could, quote unquote, share intelligence and no longer, one be withholding information that is necessary for the other to have due to, compartmentalization. That was the shtick that we were fed. And what they didn't tell us is included in that is Israel's Israeli Defense Force Unit 8200, which is their signals intelligence and basically their version of the NSA. And so since the Patriot Act was signed, the principal author of that Patriot Act, his name is Michael Chertoff, and we'll talk a lot about him and why he is important and integral to the plot today. But fast forward, we thought George Bush was the man for a little while, and then, the post-war, I guess, adrenaline wore off, and his popularity started to, slink down a little bit until the financial crisis really began in '07, right before Barack Obama came. And then obviously we had 8 years of, what we didn't realize was total subversion of the sovereignty of the United States and what we know as our Constitution. And so fast forward, we have President Trump gets elected in an upset victory over Hillary Clinton. I don't think anybody saw that coming. I sure didn't see it coming. I didn't even, full disclosure, I didn't even vote in 2016. I was sitting in my apartment in Virginia in Norfolk, laughing my ass off as the night went on because the mainstream media was just in the foreground in the lead up to the election said Hillary has a 96% chance to win. And as the day went on, I'm just like sitting here thinking, fucking Apprentice dude is kicking the shit out of the like most unlikable woman in the world. This is hilarious. I can't wait to see what the country is going to be like. But it was weird when I saw him come down the escalator and he had the red tie and is a little bit longer than it should be. But he was clapping and him and Melania and everybody walked on the stage. There was something weird about it. It was like calming for some reason. It felt like like what you talked about in the space when you know somebody's wrong, I think, and you can't really put your finger on it. I think that also goes the other way. And I talk all the time about having beacons to be able to identify who are good players and who are bad players. And there are those that you've looked at all the facts that are available to you and all of their relationships, and you still can't make a decision. That's kind of where you go with your gut. And this was one of those gut kind of things. I just felt like we were going to be okay. And 3 years later, you have the fastest growing economy, the most independent GDP we've had, lowest minority unemployment in American history in 40 years that they've been keeping up with it. The stock market was doing fantastic. We had a secure border, and Trump was well on his way to sleepwalking to re-election. And then I took a job I took a promotion to go be a senior partner at a firm in downtown Chicago, moving out of Chattanooga, Tennessee. And that was kind of life-changing for me. And that was November of 2019. So I'm pretty sure I'm in the Hall of Fame for like worst timing of anybody who's ever moved to Chicago, because 2 weeks after I got moved in, COVID made landfall. I got COVID at my own birthday party, which was a karaoke party at this underground kind of like speakeasy style karaoke bar in Chicago at the end of January. And I just remember like 3 or 4 days it knocked me on my ass, and I woke up one night, and this never happened to me before, but my body just like convulsed and a huge wave of sweat just poured out of me onto the sheet like all at once, and then it was gone. And I just woke up like freaked out, like holy crap, what was that? And it was 4 days, and vitamin C and zinc and, a lot of Theraflu, and I was fine. But it was strange. It was definitely strange, and it felt weird. And then we got the 15 days to slow the spread. Now I'm living in Chicago, and everybody is locked down. And I'm like, I got to tell you, the most haunting thing you'll ever see is a big city like Chicago or a New York, and nobody's on the streets. Nobody. You want to talk about ghost town spooky? Like, it was crazy. And I lived a block from Wacker Drive, and I got a front row seat to see the George Floyd protests start. And I was even overtaken by basically the Antifa people that started the Summer Love riots and the looting and the burning down of buildings and businesses in the major metros all over the country. I was walking down Wacker Drive from my apartment because I was going to go over to the George Floyd protests and, pay my respects to people exercising their right to freely assemble and free speech. Even though I thought, well, why are they allowing them in the middle of a pandemic we're supposed to be allowed, locked down for? But at least it's an excuse to get out of the apartment. So I'm in the middle of walking, maybe, I don't know, 500 yards to this peaceful protest. And then behind me, coming over the LaSalle Street Bridge, I start hearing a bunch of screaming. And like, I look back, and it was like a parade of like people that look like extras from the Purge movies. And I was like, what the hell is this? And they were all masked up, hoodies, backpacks, baseball bats, 2x4s, cinder blocks. And they literally overtook me, and they were like, they were just there to mess things up, and they didn't care, whose business it was. It was, whether you were Target or you were, mom and pop barely making ends meet, trying to keep your family afloat in a rough economy. And that's when I realized, like, this is coordinated. This seems artificial. And so you start thinking, okay, we've got a Trump presidency that is going like as smoothly as any presidency has gone in my lifetime. And we're not in any wars. The economy's doing great. And this guy, who's the businessman, who's running the country like a business, has got us in a position where Americans actually feel like their leadership cares about them before they care about anybody else. And it was a strange dynamic. So I started doing the math, and I realized, okay, we're exactly a year out from the next election. And right after those riots, or right before those riots, I should say, you started seeing the push for like voting in a pandemic. They started broaching that conversation about mail-in voting and voting in COVID-19. And right after the first of those George Floyd riots is when I really noticed it. And they were talking more assumptively about it. Like, we're going to be voting from home. We're going to be voting, by mail. And then they started announcing, like, in each of the states where the governors had declared states of emergency, they started laxing all the election integrity efforts under the guise of the pandemic. And so even still, we get to election day, and I was like, this is really suspicious. We get to election day, and it goes pretty much like we thought it would. Trump is ahead by, between 3 and 6 points in, the major swing states. But they won't call any of the states for some reason. I'm like, he's mathematically impossible to lose in Georgia. Like, why isn't Raffensperger calling this? Well, you go to bed and you wake up, and Joe Biden has miraculously made up all the ground in all 6 states. And doing it in one state was, I think somebody ran the numbers, it was like 1 in a billion chances that he would overcome in one state. To overcome in all 6 states, you multiply the individual probabilities by each other. Now you're talking about an event that, for it to have occurred naturally, it would have taken longer than the natural universe has existed. And that's when I was like, oh, we're under attack. We're being sabotaged. So that's when I really started paying attention and focusing on, okay, who's the enemy here? And then January 6th happened, and I know that you have a lot more experience with January 6th than I did, like as far as like being intimately involved with it and wanting to stand up and exercise your right to speak out against, what was clearly an adversarial, like, embarrassment of an election. And then the Capitol violence starts, and you're like, and I'm standing in a bar in Chicago with a bunch of, Chicago lawyers, and immediately they're all like, Donald Trump needs to be expelled from the country and prosecuted, or what? Like, it was like immediately they knew exactly who was to blame. and exactly who was responsible. And I'm standing next to this one guy, and he's like, I don't know, 55, and he's a Georgetown lawyer, I think. And he's like, crocodile tears. This is our democracy. And I'm like, dude, I'm gonna literally die of douche chills if you don't shut the. You know what I mean? Like, this is not that serious, dude. They're standing on the Capitol steps. I'm like, yeah, they paid for them. Like, what do you want? Like, they were they were invited in. But anyway, you get past January 6th, you immediately see the media lockstep on the same messaging, just like they were. The thing that I think gave them away, Alpha, was their coordinated messaging on social media about the vaccine. I just found I've been recently diagnosed with COVID. As a matter of precaution, I'm going to be isolating at home. Thank goodness I was vaccinated, so the virus is mild. I will be back with, like, that literally was said like verbatim almost by everyone. And then you're like, okay, you guys have a contract like directly with Pfizer? Like, what's going on here? And from that point on, you started realizing, okay, 2021, they get Joe Biden in, and then you start seeing the other rising of America First movement, of conservatism, of open borders, of, you know, and it was never more evident than on social media. Like, you started seeing people like Christian Anderson and Eric Topol and the COVID virologists or whatever openly starting to spew and be adamant about information that I knew with my background. I was like, this is clearly incorrect. What's going on here? Like, why are you lying? It's my pet peeve to meet some random nobody who lies. But for someone who's supposed to be a respected healthcare professional providing, you know, the public with public health information on social media, and you've got 300,000 followers, what are you doing? This is clearly false. This is like virology, immunology, pathophysiology 101. What are you doing? And that's when I started becoming adversarial. And I lost 4, I think, accounts prior to the one that's showing on my handle on the screen. I think I had 4 accounts vaporized before that one. Because I was going, like, I originally opened a Twitter account to go after the COVID people because I knew they were full of crap. And I started wondering, okay, the timing on all of the things that have happened, it's just been a perfect storm windfall of exactly what would need to happen to get Trump out of office. Like, you've got an historically popular, like, president managing in a historically, like, successful and prosperous country. Like, America in October of 2019, I remember, like, legit thinking, like, gosh, this is like the best I can ever remember this country being. Everybody was positive. Everybody was optimistic. Everybody had an opportunity to make a living and not feel like they were being undercut at every turn or dictated to by. Yeah, 2022 rolls around and you realize that the midterms are going to be incredibly meaningful in a number of states, especially Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia. And that's when I started focusing on Arizona. I gravitated more towards Arizona because I kind of understood, like, the UN and the McCain deal and the proximity to the border, and that Arizona was a globally important state, not just a nationally important state. And also because a firebrand like Carrie Lake is somebody who I thought when I first saw her and the way that she interacted with the media, I related to that. I understood the contempt and the wittiness that she had for interacting with our enemies, the media. Like the media is no longer, another checks and balance on corruption, whether it be in government or corporate rackets, but it's now just a Praetorian mouthpiece of a regime, and it's adversarial to the American people and what they want. And I saw how they continuously fired BBs at her, and she was by far, in my opinion, and still is, the most impressive candidate for the GOP that I've seen in decades. And I just remember thinking to myself, okay, she's going up against somebody who is clearly an absolute fucking tool, pardon my French, and ADIQ, no personality, didn't campaign, and gets terrified when anybody she doesn't know, and even says so, asks her a question in the public setting. Like, Katie Hobbs is the most unlikable person, not in politics, but one of the most unlikable people in the country, and absolutely was not elected. And Carrie Lake was one of the most captivating candidates that we've had on our side since I can remember. And so you go into the election immediately. Maricopa, shuts down the Republican heavy areas, and that kind of gets into where I got started in all this, because I was asking myself the question in the lead up. Okay, you've got somebody like, we're obviously experiencing a hostile takeover. Prior to this was my thought process before the election in 2022. We're obviously experiencing a hostile takeover by some interested party. So the dichotomy we have is that you've got the most popular conservative who is adversarial to the hostile takeoverers, and then you've got basically someone who's barely alive representing the bad guys that are taking over the country. So obviously this person's not going to win, like, legitimately. There's no chance. It's impossible. And it won't even be remotely close. So my thought process going in was, how are they going to do it? It wasn't a matter of were they going to try. It was a matter of, I know they're going to do this, and I know they're committed to doing this. So how are they going to do it? And so what I did is I took snapshots of basically a zero balance, to where I kept a number of the earlies that were dropped off before Election Day, because Arizona media reported on them. And they were still trying to pretend like mass mail-in voting in Arizona was the way that everybody had always voted unanimously for decades. That, like, post-COVID, they've tried to pretend like nobody ever voted on Election Day. Well, I also read what all the media articles were saying in the lead up, and they said that on Election Day, they expected double the number of in-person voters in Arizona that they had from 2020. In 2020, they had 395,000 in-person voters on Election Day. So for the math wizards, let's round up 395,000 to 400,000. All right. What's double 400,000?
800,000. Almost 1 million.
Yeah. So we subtract 10 grand from that. Let's be conservative. They were expecting a minimum of 700 to 750,000 in-person voters on Election Day in Arizona in 2022. Well, the day starts, and I was watching it like a hawk, and I knew that they had about 900 and, if I remember correctly, 86,000 some odd mail-ins that had already come in that they basically made up to favor Katie Hobbs. And Election Day comes. 20 minutes into Election Day, we get the first report of a machine failure in one of the precincts. Then next thing you know, the shit show commences. Machines start failing all over the place. Traders like Bill Gates and Stephen Richer and Katie Hobbs are obviously involved in like Katie Hobbs was running her own election for governor. And if you're listening to this, I hope you understand that I will try to get front row seats to the day that your sentencing is carried out. Please understand that. Like, I don't care. Like if I have to like take out a second mortgage, I will be there to see your sentencing carried out. But Patrick's too, by the way. But that's her husband. But anyway, yeah, they sabotaged the election clearly. And, I had even run the models using their own information in the lead up of, as far as like how they were going to administer the election, how many places were going to be open, how many voting booths, how many poll check-in facilities, like, and even the time that they were going to have to administer and cast however many votes in across the, I think it was, 223 vote centers. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's accurate. And I had broken it down and even known going in that, okay, we expected how many, Alpha? How many did we say we expected in person on election day?
800,000, almost 1 million.
The math that I ran meant that if everything worked out perfectly, nobody had any delays whatsoever at every vote center, the maximum votes they could accommodate was about 321,000. And so think about that. You're talking about 60% damn near suppression before a single vote is cast. You're talking about guaranteeing that at least half of those votes are never going to happen. And on top of that, you sabotage the machines on election day in those areas. And we later find out there's 64 partisan areas or partisan vote centers in Maricopa County. And by partisan, I mean highly Democrat or highly Republican, not one that's like split down the road, middle of the road. Out of those 64 locations, 59 of them that had machine tabulators or machine failures of some sort, out of those 64 highly partisan areas that had problems, 59 were Republican. And do the math on that. 93.7% of locations that were highly partisan that had problems were Republican heavy. I knew it was coordinated malfeasance like that day. And I got to work like putting all my thought. I wasn't a thread writer. Like I had written one thread maybe ever. I used to make fun of people who wrote threads because they were like, faggots. But anyway, and I would just like get to like tweet 3 and be like, this is stupid and wrong, and like punch yourself in the face. But like, I wasn't somebody who liked to write threads and, go on this long diatribe. But the election happened November 8th, I believe, 2022. I put out my first thread on Maricopa on November 24th, and then it carried on into the 25th. And I almost didn't send it, Alpha, because I was like, I knew like what hornet's nest I was stepping into, for better or worse. I was like, I'm labeling myself permanently as like, one of the conserva bro election people or whatever who I remember from 2020 and 2021 did all this work, and then there was like literally zero resolution that came from it, whether it's their fault or not. And I was like, yeah, let me just volunteer myself to get shit on by half the country for sticking my nose out of obscurity into this hornet's nest. But I was like, kind of like what we talked about at the beginning. I was like, this is your opportunity to do something that actually matters. Are you going to be the guy that never got involved and just take a front row seat to watch your country be taken out from underneath you? I couldn't deal with that. I couldn't live with that. And so I made the promise to myself that, all right, once you hit send on this thing, your two commitments that you make to yourself are you're going to follow the truth regardless of where it leads, no matter what, even if it leads right back to the people that you believe you're close with or that you hold in high regard or that you support. And number 2, like, you have to be fully prepared for if you're right about, and I knew I was, but if you're right about what you're saying, and you get into this thing and you are effective, you have to be fully prepared for the people that are much more popular, much, highly compensated, and that aren't eating Ritz crackers and peanut butter multiple times a week for meals. Like, they're going to take your work, they're going to take credit for it, they're going to pretend you don't exist, and you'll still be left with obscurity, probably with not so much as even a thank you. You have to be prepared for that. And when you realize that America is worth that, like going into battle, knowing that, like in the movie Troy, Brad Pitt, Achilles says, it's just there over that ridge. It's glory. Take it. It's yours. Like, you have to be prepared to be in this game knowing that even if we save the country, like somebody else is going to take credit, you're going to get nothing out of it, but at least you'll have your country. And that's more than worth it. And obviously the November 2022 elections and me putting that out about Maricopa, that was a paradigm shift for me. That was when I focused everything on where we are today, because that's when it was solidified for me that it's not only a hostile takeover, but it's directly adversarial, and who gives a shit about what the American people want? We'll take it by force if we have to. And they're ramping it up, and they don't care about being as secretive because they were clearly sloppy as hell. We caught them in about 17 different places stealing Arizona and a number of other states as well. But that's when I put my finance career on hold that I've been doing for 12 years and started focusing solely on this. I was lucky and blessed. I could have been surrounded by any number of lunatics and psychopaths and bad actors, that I met randomly on social media and through other channels. But I was fortunate in that the people that I started working with and supporting Carrie and her legal team with research, as well as we've supported with, in Georgia and Wisconsin, Texas, Virginia, and other places around the country. I was surrounded by the good guys and absolute savages, patriots who will never get the name recognition, never get enough credit for all the time and the work that they've done, and absolutely brilliant people, humble people, and just care about saving the country. And I've learned far more from them than they probably learned from me. But that's when it became an obsession for me, and that's when it became personal. And so since that day, I put in, and I'm not exaggerating, probably, I have had no days off since November 8th of 2022, not one, where I didn't at least do something. But on average, it's between 16 to 20-hour days. I get up at 5 or 6, I do this, I go to bed at probably midnight or 1, sleep my 4 or 5 hours, and wake up and do it all over again. And I know that I'm doing the most important work that I've ever done and the most meaningful work. I'm also doing the lowest paid work I've ever done, and that's okay too. I'm like, everybody wants to be just like me, like fucking eating Pop-Tarts and Ritz crackers and like having to ask buddies to like let you Venmo so you can get Taco Bell or some bullshit. But like, such is life. So yeah, that's a pretty good backdrop, Alpha. I'll shut up for a moment and kind of let you like take your show back. I'm sorry.
No, I like what you did, because I actually had some other people that are in the election scheme, and I'd been wanting to bring them on to do something to kind of set the picture up for those that are just waking up or maybe just kind of figuring out like what we know. And you did exactly what I was going to set up another show to do for that. Like, you covered that. And so, I didn't tell you this, but, people that have been following this show since its inception know that I don't script the shows. I'll ask my guests, hey, what are we going to talk about? You got some videos and some links, to, help with the aesthetics of the show, right? Because we're people that like to use our eyes. I get it. but I don't script it. And the reason I don't script it is I think one of the reasons that the audience is here tonight is because they can sense the authenticity of information. You know, we're gonna have things that are, you know, you hear a baby cry in the background, right, or a puppy run up or something like that. You know, people can relate to that. You know what I mean? People can relate to being on a business call or something, especially because of COVID, and they're telling their kid like, hey, "Daddy's on the phone," right? It's real, you know, and I think that when people get to see, it's like you said, the same way our discernment can let us know, you know, bad. Our discernment also lets us know when, oh, this is legit, this is real, and you painted that picture because there's so many people. I know I was doing it as you were explaining that. I remember how I felt when I saw that, and like, oh yeah, I felt that way too when you were talking about, you know, those metropolitan areas like a ghost town. You know, I was doing canine contract work for Disney out here in Anaheim, California, when all this was going on. And you're talking about the 91 freeway is a nightmare. You know, like there's, you know, that I could get to, you know, for those that are familiar with Southern California, I could get from the Palm Springs area to Corona and fairly fast. You know, that'd take me 40 minutes to make that trek. But from that point to Disney, sometimes could take another hour and a half to 2 hours. I was making it from Palm Springs area to Disney 45 minutes doing the speed limit. It was a ghost town. It literally looked like the scenes from what's the zombie TV show?
Walking Dead.
Walking Dead. Thank you. It literally looked like you'd just see another car just or on the other, and you're like, this is creepy. And for me, it was, I started to realize the power of what was going on, you know, in 2020, but it was in 2021, you know, when Biden's administration took over, that I really like digested like, holy shit, because everything I do is like, you know, or not everything I do, but the lens that I see things through is based off my life experience, right? Which is going to be military and law enforcement. So I kind of look at things from like an operational standpoint. And I started seeing like the things you're seeing that you were, you know, articulating with the headlines and the media and the radio. All the pattern recognition is what we're talking about. And when I started to recognize this pattern recognition, and also on the commercial side of large businesses like Disney, like these are corporations that are all about money. They're not going to shut down because of something. Like the influence that it takes to shut these entities down is massive. And that's when I realized like this fight is like the enemy is huge. Like we're talking about like this is really, we're not just talking some corrupt politicians and some corrupt NGOs. Like those are the workforces, those are the tools being used, but we're talking about the intel agencies, the military, the Department of Defense. We're talking, I mean, we're talking about the US fucking government, right? Like this is how big that is. And then when you realize that, well, then who's controlling the US government? And one thing you said that I think is so important, and people have to adopt this mindset, is that if I'm in pursuit of the truth, then no matter where that truth leads me to, I'm going to be committed to it, which means that could mean your church. That can mean your president elect. That could mean someone in the military. Like it could mean the company you work for. So many people are probably like, holy shit, like this money trail is taking me back to the very entity that I work for. Like your commitment to truth has to be there's nothing that gets in the way of it. The truth is a truth. And so when you were explaining that and articulating it, I was just like, man, Jonathan really gets it. Like he gets it. And that's why I didn't want to interrupt, because I know if I'm feeling that, I know the audience is feeling that. And you know, when these shows unfold, it's, you know, if people subscribe to a higher power, God, creator, source, whatever name you want to adopt, then I'm a firm believer that if I keep my ego and my motive in the backdrop of this particular podcast and others and let it go where it's supposed to go, then the mission that's supposed to be heard is going to be heard. And while you explained, I mean, you did such a good job of articulating, this is where it was this is where it got us to, and this is the foundation. You know, yes, the intel stuff is the sexiness, right? You know, that's the stuff that more likely people are going to clip, you know, when they do this show. But for the people that are seeking the truth, well, the foundation of how you got to that information is important, because that's what's going to resonate with people. You know, we don't get that when we go read a Newsweek article. We don't get that when we watch a 20-minute segment on CNN or Fox or Newsmax. You don't get that. And in an information warfare, all the way back to the way, you know, one of the things we first talked about when we got started here, and information warfare is so important, then, you know, people being able to absorb it and develop a rapport. You know, this is you developing a rapport with my audience, which the vast majority of probably this is the first time they're going to get to hear your information and your intel gathering. And to allow you to develop that rapport with them is important to me, because why? That's my background. You know, and why was I able to get so many statements from high priority crimes from suspects? Well, knowing they're not, you know, everybody thinks not all criminals are dumb, you guys. There were criminals that knew that when they told me what they were going to tell me, that I have an obligation to put that on paper and file the appropriate charges against them, which was probably going to put them in prison for a vast majority of the life they have left. So why would they tell me? It's rapport. It's people feeling the need to, like, I just gotta get, you were making me feel like I just gotta say the truth. And I understand these things, and it's probably why, you know, this podcast has done so well, is people get to see my face and my voice all the time. They're here for you guys. You guys are your guys is what gives this show a purpose. And that's why, you know, I enjoyed that, man, because I know what's coming. Like, I know what you're about to talk about, and I know there's some people are going to be like, "Whoa, no, hold on, Jonathan. You're saying? Are you telling me?" And then they get to revert back to, "Hey, we just spent, you know, developing rapport. So yeah, you know this man now. You know, you have a good understanding of why he's at where he's at, why he's doing what he's doing. So swallow the pill. It's better to swallow the pill now than take the suppository later, because you can't stop what's going to unfold if you don't have the information." So yeah, that's what I got to say to that, brother.
Yeah, and you mentioned the ego thing. It's so important because you know, it can't be about your own edification. It has to be about the truth and getting to the heart of the matter. And like we talked about at the beginning, whether or not you're ever even given, you know, a thank you note or a Hallmark card, like, that's irrelevant. The mission and the objective is all that matters. And so that's going to require you to lay your ego aside. That being said, there's a difference between having an ego just for the purposes of having an ego and being certain that you're certain about. Yeah. So, you know, ego is something that can be a stumbling block. And as I mentioned, there's a difference between having an ego just for the purposes of having an ego, but also knowing that you know something, or being certain that you're certain, and preparing to such a level that you're not only know you're right, you know they're incorrect, and how to disarm them or deconstruct their entire argument. And then once you're armed with that level of understanding of a subject, you can then start to focus on what really matters, and that's the motivations behind why they're doing what they're doing. And something that's very easy for your audience, like to wake up really quickly and to start kind of predicting how things are going to go, is in every situation that you come to, whether it's the border situation, or it's the vaccine mandates, or it's the, you know, World Health Organization, the Pandemic Prevention Treaty and all that nonsense, or voting and elections and what have you, election integrity, always ask yourself at the beginning, like before you dive into something, who stands to benefit, who stands to lose something? All right. And if you answer those two questions, you can understand at scale the motivations for basically all of what's happening right now. And so I mentioned the ego thing, and although I'm sure people would say that, you know, I have an ego. I don't think I have an ego. I think I'm prepared to be on certainty in certain things, not everything, but in certain things. And with that preparation and the hours and time of commitment, like there comes a certain, you know, when you talk about taking ownership, you also take ownership of the fact that you have committed that amount of, you know, absurd, obsessive time, unreasonable time, if you will, and you can become very what's the word I'm looking for? Not touchy, but it can almost be offensive when you believe that there's no way that somebody has put in nearly as much time as you have on a subject. And so a friend of mine and I were having a conversation the other day, Ash, who you know, and we were talking about a certain thing. And it's funny that we're talking about it now, and she's probably going to hate me for bringing up this story, but that's why I'm definitely going to tell it. So we were talking about a certain thing, and we first broached the subject probably 6 months ago, and she was like, you know, I have this habit of, because of the discernment that I've been blessed with, that I mentioned, like it's 100% a gift I've been given. I can tell it's perceptively different than it is or has been at any point in my life. But I always deal with like this 3 to 6 or 12-month period where like I'll put information out or I'll understand, like it'll finally click to me. And it is possible to see something so early and put something out so early that it is conducive to generating, you know, people thinking that you're a lunatic, people thinking that you're just racist, an anti-Semite, a bigot, just, you know, and I was living in Chicago when all this started, but now I'm living in Alabama. So when people find that out, they just assume I'm like American History X or Mississippi Burning or something. Like, yeah, you guys just got electricity and running water like what, 10 years ago? What do you know? And so oh, classic. But yeah, they can assume that like every time you call or talk to them, you just want to rant about this group or this faction that, you know, they don't see it yet. They don't get it yet. And it's okay. And they'll never apologize for calling you, like whatever it is that they called you when they finally do get it. But that just comes with the territory. So me and Ash were having a conversation the other day, and she says, I've been at this as long or longer than you, and like length of time that someone has been at this. Like I totally understand. I never wanted to get involved in this life. Like I had no intentions of being a Politico or Republican. I've never attended any like RNC or GOP or like any conserva bro like events or anything like that. You know, never wanted a podcast or anything. And now I see the importance of it, especially in today's environment. But I know that she has been involved in this game, you know, at least going back to 2018, if not much farther back then. Back then, I didn't care about politics. I was hoping I never had to care about politics. And so I totally agree with her on that. But that being said, and here's where the ego piece or whatever you want to call it piece comes into play. Like whenever somebody says, you know, other people have been in this fight just as long, or people have put just as much time as you have into blah, blah, blah. That's where I'm like, no, you haven't. And I don't mean that in the wrong, like an asshole. Like, I'm just telling you, like with your situation, the obligations that you have, and knowing how much, like I'm doing it literally every day, like 20 hours a day for over 2 years, it's not possible that you have put in, and I don't mean, again, I don't mean that the wrong way. And we can start to get that way. And I get that way, like only on the things that I'm like, I've sacrificed literally my whole life and I have a pretty like not socially like ideal life for a 39-year-old guy at this point. Not exactly living the dream, so to speak. But I know I'm exactly in the position that I'm supposed to be in, and so I'm doing it obsessively, and I don't like. I get so many people are committed to this, and I want people to like. More people need to join the fight, but you and I both know we have like this ego where it's like if I know something, like if you know how to like fucking dress down a criminal or handle a weapon or whatever, or fucking shoot at the range, and you know you own that space, you're not just going to take lightly for somebody not even saying they're better than you, but like that they're, yeah, I get it. I've done all that too. Like, especially not when you have literally committed your entire life and soul into something like you, it's, and it
I'm there.
takes,
I'm there with you, brother. I had an experience like that in a space with some people of names of notoriety, right? And it's like you said, every now and then a topic will get served up, and you're just like, now this is like I know a lot about a lot, but this is my expertise. Like like this is my home field right here on a winning season, right? I'm undefeated in this arena, and
yeah.
it was the Ashley Babbitt shooting,
Oof.
right? And they were talking about, for those, I know there's a lot of speculation there, but with the stipulation that you believe that it's a real shooting, I'll preface it with that. They're talking about, well, no, the investigation's there. He was justified in this and this, and I'm telling people like, this one particular character is trying to go back and forth. I mean, a lot of people like him. He's a big name, and I'm just like, no, you're wrong, dude. And he's like, no, no. I'm like, man, not only was this my career for a decade and a half, I've lived this literally every day, but I've also been in 4 shootings as a cop. Like I have firsthand experience of not just one shooting, but multiple scenarios of shootings. And in some of those shootings, I didn't fire back. Like I know like this is my jam, bro. Like, I was studying that. I don't care how many use of force videos you watched, man. Like this is my thing. So when you're saying like there's some things that can give you that, you just ice picked me in the ribs on something, man. So I'm gonna throw some punches on this one.
Yeah.
Like I feel you, man.
I'm not just gonna let you get away with that comment. Like, I'm sorry, that's not how it's going down. But like we moved on. Like 5 days later, like it's like nothing happened, and I'm thankful for her and others like her and you guys. And I think January 6th is really what got us on this space, because going back to the beginning, understanding big picture, what's the overall objective? The overall objective is a hostile takeover of not only the United States, but really the levers of power in most major supranational sovereign nations worldwide. And it's by a certain faction that we're going to get into, and it might be some shell shock for a lot of people. And I said this in the space the other day that George Carlin was one of my favorite comedians. He was wise before beyond his years, and in his later life, the thing, obviously I'm not on board with his atheism and his making fun of Christ and God and religion and the Bible, but the part that he did nail was how the government feels about the people and what they're all about, and why government and why society has kind of deteriorated from the, what we grew up believing and being taught America stood for and really was. And he says it's the softening of language. And the softening of language, how in World War I, when soldiers were coming back from World War I, they used to call it shell shock, when they would be just emotionally, psychologically, and mentally and physically in a lot of cases just completely drained and wiped because of the traumatic experiences that they had been subjected to. And today, we call it, before it went to what it is today, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, they call it, I think he said it was operational battle fatigue or something like that, and then operational anxiety or something like that. But he said that if we called it shell shock still today, maybe there'd be fewer vets that are not getting nearly the care and the attention and the grace from their own country that they deserve, that they gave themselves over to serve and defend and protect. And it starts with softening of language, because language can create or translate urgency. And urgency should be relative to the severity or the seriousness or the gravity of a situation. And I think a soldier that gave himself to defend my country, lost a limb, and is going to be having flashbacks to some of the most unfathomable horrors that he lived through for the rest of his life, and he's my age, and he's got the rest of his life ahead of him. I want to use the language that's going to get the job done, to make sure that they're taken care of, to make sure that that guy who more than deserves it, who's bigger patriot than most can ever even possibly imagine, gets right to the heart of the matter. They get him the treatment he needs so that he can be taken care of by the country that he gave himself to take care of prior to. And that's really what we really are up against, is not only an informational war, but a battle on our speech itself. In the book 1984, Winston talks about how at the end of everything, Big Brother, even if you didn't like Big Brother, or even if you didn't agree with Big Brother, you weren't even capable of criticizing Big Brother, because they had outlawed and removed from the language all of the verbs and the words and the phrases that you would say to criticize Big Brother. So Big Brother was basically permanently sheltered from criticism just because they removed those words from the language. And we're seeing the effects of that on a kind of like a micro scale today. It's not as far gone as that, but it's certainly on that path. And so January 6th, that's, like we mentioned, that's what got us on this space, and what purpose did it serve? And you look back and you remember Mike Pence making that promise at the press conference where he said, your voices will be heard, I promise you, on, I think he said Wednesday stands out. And if January 6th was a Wednesday, then it checks out. But it just stands out in my brain that he was saying, I promise you, I know you're all upset about the election irregularities and what happened in the 2020 elections. I hear you. I promise your voices will be heard on Wednesday. And so Ted Cruz got together with some of the other Republicans, and they developed a plan that had precedent. I think 1884 was the year that they had already had precedent for what Ted Cruz had proposed. He had proposed that the electors, especially the states that sent alternate electors, not fraudulent, alternate, don't let them use verbiage that conveys an intentionally disingenuous message. Alternate electors with precedent, they wanted to send those electors back to the states for 10 days so each state could have the opportunity to investigate those irregularities and obvious evidences of manipulations and potential fraud. And that was what January 6th was designed to do. They weren't going to certify the election. They were going to send the electors back to the states. Well, who stands to benefit and who stands to lose something in that scenario? Who stands to benefit on January 6th if everything goes without a hitch and the electors are sent back to the states? Well, Republicans, they get their voices heard. They get these irregularities looked into. They get their questions answered. And I'll tell you this, whether or not I like Joe Biden or agree with the outcome, had I gotten the opportunity to at least have my voice heard and been given the ability to redress grievances with my government, I could have accepted the fact that, okay, you investigated everything, so you say, you heard us out, we got to be participants and stakeholders in that investigation, and Joe Biden still won. Okay, so be it. And millions of Trump supporters would have supported that. And I'll go ahead and tell you right now, I would have been right at the front, leading that charge. That's not what happened, though. They needed certification. They needed closure. They needed it. They needed a reason, the same way they needed a reason to justify mass mail-in voting, where you could lax elections laws, reduce chains of custody of verification who's a voter and who is not a legal voter, who's a citizen and who isn't, who's voted once in this state already and is trying to cast a vote in this state. Like, all of those things are designed to remove the barriers to fraud. And the justification around it was COVID. The justification to certify January 6th was the January 6th quote unquote attack. And it served two purposes, and we've seen it in the aftermath. It served as the Reichstag fire to basically act as this idol to villainize an entire ideological faction of the United States. The America First, the Make America Great Again, the I want to take care of our own house before we start worrying about getting anybody else's houses in order. And it also gave them the opportunity and the excuse to criminalize and villainize and label white Christian populist or nationalist, however you want to say it, men, people who look like me and largely are Christian, the people who are actually largely overwhelmingly responsible for the foundation of this country. It gave them an excuse to villainize us and weaponize the apparatus of the state and federal law enforcement against us. And so when you understand it from that perspective, then it becomes clear, and we know in the aftermath how many people they fucking arrested. I think the number is something like 1,400 in the last however many months or so. I don't know how many they've arrested all told, but we knew that everything at that point had been a lie. Everything that we had been told, like COVID, the elections, natural immunity isn't a thing. You're killing grandma. Even if you've had COVID before, you should still get vaccinated. Widespread voter fraud is there's no evidence. Like, that's my favorite. Like, you hand people a stack of evidence this big, like all of the reasons, like, yeah, these are all the ways that we caught you, dipshit. Like, it's clear. Oh, well, that's not evidence. You didn't even look at. No, well, that's not evidence. Like, that's my favorite. The wholesale dishonesty. And that's when I realized we're in an operation. And then they started trying to pervade this idea that this loose network of internet sleuths had been working with the FBI voluntarily out of their own goodwill to hunt down Trump supporters and anybody who was being guilty of happening to be in Washington, D.C. on January 6th as an enemy of the state. A guy named Ryan Riley, who is definitely not a glowy, wrote a book literally called Sedition Hunters. You look at the January 6th committee that they set up, and they didn't allow anybody on the Republican side other than those who Nancy Pelosi approved of. And I'll never forget it as long as I live. The reason that they gave when we found out that Pelosi rejected Jim Jordan and was Thomas Massey one of them? I can't remember the other ones. I'll never forget when Republicans were upset about that, rightly so. And she of course went and picked, Liz Cheney, and Adam Kinzinger. Eric Swalwell comes out and his fucking dumbass, and he says, yeah, we're not going to let the people holding the gasoline and the matches investigate the fire. And I thought to myself, that's where we're at. This piece of shit has no evidence, no proof, no nothing. He could be every bit as fucking guilty as any one of us or any one of those other conservative politicians that were in DC on January 6th. But he has the gall to talk to us as from an assumptive standpoint with no investigation. This guy has an agenda. And now I have one too, and it's to destroy that guy. And so that's when I realized we're really at waking up. They know that they don't have the popularity. They know they don't have the votes. They know they don't have the will of the people. So they have to import people. And yes, it's a Cloward Piven strategy where they want to dilute the white race out of existence. We know that. But it's also to have their own voters, especially when we found out that they're using tax dollars to fly these people around the country. Like this only, like when you look at everything that's happened, if we were at war with our own government, what would they do differently than what they're doing right now? Like, what would they do differently in East Palestine than doing literally all of the wrong, opposite, worst possible things that they could do? What would they do differently than having Joe Biden get up in front of the nation at the State of the Union and labeling us domestic terrorist threats and letting Jonathan Greenblatt of the ADL basically label white people as enemies of America? What would they do differently? And so when you realize they're going over the top, that's when it becomes evident. Okay, I've identified they have this agenda, take over the country. That means make patriots an enemy. That means flood the borders. That means completely throw out anything we've already known for decades about, public health and, science and virology and pathology and all that. Like, that doesn't matter. So I knew there was a big pharma angle that was profiteering on this. I knew that somebody stood to benefit with the death protocols that they subjected people to in the hospitals with the remdesivir and the diazepam and the intubation. We knew that they initially approved hydroxychloroquine and ivermectin and then withdrew it because they needed the EUA to go through, not because they were only worried about profiteering on Paxlovid and the vaccines, but because they also needed the shield of liability, the shield from liability that the EUA provides. And so Rochelle Walensky and Mandy Cohen, they got their happy asses up in front of the country and they told everybody that ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine didn't work. And we've known they worked, especially for corona-style viruses. We've known that since 2005 from Anthony Fauci. So what's the deal? What game are we playing? Is it just a profiteering game? Are you really trying to kill people? Or what's worse, and what your audience is about to find out, they're trying to profiteer off of killing people. It's a million times worse than you can ever possibly imagine. And so to kind of set the scene on how this all ties in and how they could have done it, and so that your audience knows exactly what we're up against. I say all that to say there's a guy by the name of Victor Ostrovsky. He was a 20-year IDF agent. He joined the IDF at 14. And the last 14 months of his career, he spent as a Mossad agent. And after 14 months, he became a burn notice and he turned whistleblower because he was just horrified what Mossad was up to, what they were actually doing, what they had been doing. And So he wrote 2 books. The first is called By Way of Deception. It's half of Mossad's actual slogan. For those who don't know, Mossad's legitimate slogan is, by way of deception, thou shalt make war. And also, for those who don't know, Mossad is the most ruthless, infiltrative, subversive intelligence agency in the world. And there's not a close second, even our own CIA and DIA. And they subvert and infiltrate governments all over the globe. And that's been their MO since day one. So the first book that he wrote, By Way of Deception, was basically what Mossad's agenda was from the perspective of Israel and Mossad, from being on the inside, on this side of the fight. The second book that he wrote was the tell-all about Mossad and its impacts on the geopolitical environment globally from the perspective of everybody else. So us and every other nation around the world, the effect and the impact and the influence that Mossad has on everyone else. And so he had 2 co-writers in that second book, and they were discussing the things that they were going to include in the book and the things that they weren't going to include. And they all 3 unanimously agreed that the things that they would not include in the book were that Mossad had infiltrated and basically taken over a lot of these Jewish-based, nonprofits or NGOs that are designed to, support Jewish causes or align with Jewish values. What they didn't want to include was the fact that the ADL, AIPAC, and UJA Federation, which is United Jewish Appeal, those 3 entities aren't just favorable to Israel, they're literally Mossad. And so I'm going to repeat that, because who openly brags today about donating all this money to all of our politicians that go in Congress and pass, anti-First Amendment, anti-Semitism bills that basically criminalize many parts of the New Testament? That's AIPAC.
I don't know if you can see it on your screen, Jonathan, but I brought up track APAC, and here's just a look at Texas. And what do we see right there? But Mr. Dan Kent Crenshaw, who's received almost $250,000 from APAC. And you can go through this. This is track APAC. The link will be down in the description for those that are like, what the heck are you talking about? You can track the Senate. You can track the House. Literally, you can go through every state that you want, and find people that you're just like, well, no, I like this guy. I like this guy. This person says good things. Then you'll see a lot of names and a lot of faces that you're like, what? But they're on there. So I'll give it back to you.
Yeah. So when you think about, January 6th and the 2 days after January 6th, it was Jonathan Greenblatt at the ADL who wrote the letter to Congress requesting and demanding, really, that Donald Trump be removed from office because of his blatant culpability without due process. Who cares about what that is anymore? And then you realize that, wait, they're a foreign intelligence agency. They train every FBI agent in the country. They openly brag about it. If you're in Quantico, before you can graduate to become a special agent in the United States, you are trained by the ADL, and then you have to finish up at the Washington, D.C. Holocaust Museum and go through the whole deal. So when you think about it, and you guys need to get in the habit of doing this, call things as they are, not as what they pervade themselves to be. When you realize what they really are, Mossad is training our federal law enforcement. So who does our federal law enforcement really work for? Then you realize Edward Snowden back in 2013, 2014 exposed the fact that the NSA was already openly sharing Americans' unfiltered data with the IDF Unit 8200, which is Israel's NSA, without a warrant. And then you realize that in the last 6 months, we've learned that the virus itself was genomically calibrated to target primarily white European, quote unquote, Aryans, people that look like me, crackers, all right? Target us and be more, have a what's called a higher binding specificity or affinity for white people and not harm one specific group. And I would have never have imagined it in a million years. But Ashkenazi Jews are not, almost not at all, affected by COVID. And I've seen the studies.
I want to read
got the proof.
I want to read a headline from an article. This comes from The Guardian. And it says, over 10 years old now, NSA shares raw intelligence, including Americans' data, with Israel. Secret deal places no legal limits on the use of data by Israelis. Only official U.S. government communications protected. Agency insists it complies with rules governing privacy. And it says, read the NSA and Israel's memorandum of understanding. Like, this is not bullshit, you guys. And all the links will be down in the description. I'll give it back to you, Jonathan.
Yeah, and so you realize, okay, what are the chances that it just so happens this virus shows up with perfect timing to get an historically popular, favorable president at the time out of office? It was the perfect storm. Who benefited from it most? Well, the people who wanted Trump out of office. Who's the current president? Joe Biden, the largest recipient of Israeli campaign donations of all time, by far. It's not even close. Who's number 3? Hillary Clinton. Where has AIPAC put all of their 2024 money to date? On Democrat incumbents. That's when you realize there's a large influential faction within Israel that wants the status quo to be what it currently is here in America. They like America being the vassal state, subsidizing genocidal campaigns against the Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza, but also fighting their battles. Like, they need, like, they're not stupid. They know that we have the most advanced military in the world, but they also spend more relative to GDP, overall GDP. Israel spends more or a larger share of their GDP on defense than any other country in the world. And objectively speaking, they're 2 of the 5 intelligence agencies are the best in the world, ours and theirs, regardless of who you ask. And then you see an event like the Hamas attacks happen, conveniently right on the heels of everybody being tired of sending all of our money to Ukraine. People were so over the Ukraine basically looting the American treasury that they needed another excuse. And you don't have to look further than the Hamas attacks and then the immediate legislation that was proposed right after it that conveniently had another line item in for Ukraine, additional Ukrainian aid. So when you understand the dynamic that our intelligence apparatus has with Israel's, you not only understand that it's not possible that we didn't know about the attack from Hamas. It's not possible that Israel didn't know about the attack from Hamas in advance. And I want to be clear about this. It's not that it's unlikely. It's not that we fell asleep at the wheel. It's not that, it's improbable or somebody dropped the ball. I'm telling you, it's impossible. What Edward Snowden exposed way back when with solar winds and the capabilities that the NSA has to just collect data from every digital piece of our digital footprint on the internet or that exists in the airwaves anywhere, they can snatch it with no hesitation instantaneously, unless they were talking on walkie-talkies or smoke signals, which they clearly weren't. There is no way we weren't forewarned about it. There's no way Israel wasn't forewarned about it. And so you see that, and you see these people just getting indiscriminately pulled out of their homes and killed for hours, and no emergency response for 6 hours, and then another batch at like the 10-hour mark. Then you realize, okay, this is intentional. And then you dig a little deeper and you realize, wait, Hamas is an Israeli construct to begin with. Hamas was literally a creation of IDF Unit 8200 and Likud, and has the full faith, backing, and support of Ben Netanyahu. And then you realize Netanyahu willingly let his own people be slaughtered by people who, we already know some of these are the case. Some of them were IDF and Mossad people killing their own Israelis to further the agenda. And why? It was to justify the basically genocide of Palestinians basically through the entire Gaza Strip and the land grab. So is Israel willing to sacrifice 1,500 people, even of its own kind, to accomplish its overall agenda? Well, anybody who's studied a little bit of history, when I talked about the overarching pieces of, you know, what all of this comes down to, the Kennedy assassinations, 9/11, COVID, the open borders, the stolen elections, the Hamas attacks, like, who benefited the most? When you look back at all of those situations, it wasn't the United States. It's one country. It's Israel. And I mentioned this at the beginning of the segment. Our buddy Michael Chertoff. People probably remember him from being appointed by George Bush to be the second ever Secretary of Department of Homeland Security. But what people don't remember oftentimes is that Michael Chertoff is second generation Mossad. His mother was literally a Mossad agent. He was literally appointed as the principal investigator behind the 9/11 attacks. He was the guy who absolved Israel of responsibility for 9/11. And he was the principal co-author of the Patriot Act, which was the greatest abridgment of constitutionally protected rights against American citizens in the history of our country. And inside the Patriot Act, he even baked in protections for Israel so that in the future, Israel could be, I guess, how you say, shielded somewhat or insulated from sets of peering eyes that decided to reevaluate the Israel situation, or the 9/11 situation, rather. And then you realize that Ehud Barak, the former prime minister of Israel, begged one of our presidents on his way out of office to pardon a guy by the name of Marcel Reich, who later changed his name to Mark Rich. Who was Mark Rich? Well, Tel Aviv University has a building named after him. He must have been pretty important. He was an Ashkenazi Jew living in Switzerland who, in the wake of the 9/11 attacks, after the United States had implemented sanctions on Afghanistan and Iran, he's the guy who colluded with Mossad agents behind the United States' back to coordinate energy and oil deals for the Ayatollah, the Iranians, and the Israelis. So not only did Israel and our own CIA, the Bushes, the Clintons, basically massacre damn near 3,000 innocent American citizens, Israel couldn't be bothered on the back end to have to pay a higher price for oil or energy. That just won't do at all. So this guy leverages Mossad and goes this is our greatest ally, folks. Goes behind our backs to broker these deals under the table. And as a reward, Ehud Barak gets him a pardon, and then he later appoints Michael Chertoff to the board of his own energy company. These are the people that have written policy and that dictates how Americans live their lives today and the relationship that we have with Israel. Okay, well, what does this have to do with January 6th or the elections or any of that? Well, I'll tell you what it has to do with it. About 3 or 4 weeks ago, maybe longer than that, maybe closer to a month and a half, 2 months ago, I'm talking to my buddy Peter Berniger, who's one of the most awesome election integrity people, fighting his ass off up in Wisconsin. Wisconsin is very blessed to have him on their side.
Smart dude.
Incredibly smart. I'm fortunate to know him, call him a colleague and a friend. And he sends me an email, and just an email from John Paulos, and they're discussing. John Paulos is the CEO of Dominion, mind you, and they're discussing some issues that they're having with the 2020 election. And those issues were this guy by the name of Goran Obradovich, who's a C-suite level executive at Dominion, was discussing with their Serbian operatives that they had at headquarters in Belgrade, Serbia. These Serbian operatives had been infiltrating the Michigan elections in 2020 and altering the outcomes. And they got caught in the process. They were caught red-handed. And so what happened? The white hats, those in the United States and in Europe, not only posted their names online, they posted their pictures so that people could identify them around the world and know who these people are that are literally stealing the elections in Michigan in 2020 in the United States. They started freaking out when they realized this was happening. So they went to Goran Obradovich and they said, what do we do? This is like, we're getting caught. We're going to be exposed. Like, we're going to be, extradited to the United States and they're going to hang us. Goran Obradovich expresses these sympathies to Dominion CEO John Paulos. And John Paulos, after Goran asks him, what do we do? What do we do? John Paulos replies, in the interest of security, Mike McGee is handling with K2. And K2, for those who don't know, is incredibly influential as far as January 6th is concerned, but also with our stolen elections and so much more.
Let me jump in right there, Jonathan.
Yeah.
I have a K2. What K? This is back when they were K2 Intelligence. They've now transitioned that name to K2 Integrity, I believe. Correct.
Correct.
So, but this is a K2 video back when they went by K2 Intelligence. It's theirs, and it's called The Introduction. It's 1:52. Let me play this, and we'll come right back to this conversation.
I think what makes K2 Intelligence different from the competitive field is our track record and our experience.
The intelligence business has changed rather remarkably in recent years, and I would attribute it to two factors. One is the internet. The second thing is the globalization of the business, which means the opportunities are international and the problems are international.
Jules started Kroll Associates in 1972. He's incredibly active in K2 Intelligence as our chairman. He still works with clients, and he's very much involved in the business.
We're able to provide examples of solutions that we've worked on in the past.
It's an incredible opportunity for our management team who can draw on Jules's experience and his network. I think it's a unique asset that no one else can claim.
The way we think about getting to the facts is no longer doing a kind of sequential detective work, if you will, but we're doing a lot of work with big data.
There's this big data universe now that is so large and is so vast and so complicated that you really need the most cutting-edge technology.
Technology used by the government in order to ferret out terrorism or intelligence matters in general. We are now applying that to the private sector.
Our staff comes from a variety of backgrounds in law enforcement and intelligence, military, journalism, public accounting, computer science, offers our clients, I think, a very unique perspective on their problem or their issue. And that mix of our heritage and background, the experience of our people, and the use of proprietary technologies gives us our competitive difference.
When I started MyPillow, it was just a problem solution one product company. Well, since then, with the help of my dedicated employees, we now have hundreds of products, some you might not even know about. To get the word out, we're having a $25 extravaganza. 2-pack multi-use MyPillows, $25. MyPillow sandals, $25. And for the first time ever, our 6-pack towel sets, you guessed it, just $25. Our brand new 4-pack dish towels, $25. And I've never done this before. Premium MyPillows with all new Giza fabric, any size, any loft level, even king size for only $25. And there's so much more. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use your promo code for our $25 extravaganza. Order $75 and over. Your entire order ships absolutely free.
President's former National Security Advisor, Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, pleading guilty today to lying to the FBI.
Flynn knew exactly how the system worked. He knew exactly what the intel world had been up to. He understood its funding. They had to get rid of Flynn.
There was a moment where I just felt like I was drowning. So I'm in there with these other political appointees. They're all supposed to go in there and tell what they believe to be the truth. What they did was they took my assessment and they wanted me to change it. And I was like, I'm not changing it.
He was, by definition, the most dangerous possible person for Donald Trump to hire.
President Obama said, but I do have one specific recommendation. Stay away from Michael Flynn. He's bad news.
Over time, instead of being pounded down below the surface of the ocean, we started to fight. I'm now above the surface.